Hey, what's up guys, and welcome back to the channel. Bakeries seem harmless, right? Fresh bread, cupcakes, the smell of cinnamon rolls. But if you ever worked those late night prep shifts or early morning openings, you know how quickly things can get weird. Customers who just won't leave, strange noises when you're supposed to be alone, and moments that'll make you question if you're losing it. Now, these are not ghost stories. They're real experiences from real people. If you ever wonder what happens when the bakery door closes, you're about to find out. Let's begin. About 6 years ago, my grandmother passed away. She was my everything to me, and the days leading up to her funeral were a blur of grief and trying to stay busy. I decided to stop by a small bakery in town to grab some of her favorite treats, things she used to love when she was alive, to put out for the family after the service. The place was this quiet, old-school bakery that had been around forever. My grandma loved it, so it felt like the right choice. It was a Tuesday morning, and the place was almost empty. There was just me, the woman behind the counter, and a guy sitting by the window who was nursing a coffee. He looked normal enough, mid-30s, dressed in jeans and a dark hoodie. I did not pay much attention to him because I was focused on what I wanted to order. I picked out a mix of pastries, danishes, cookies, some cinnamon rolls, and chatted briefly with the woman working there. She was kind and said how sorry she was when I mentioned the funeral. I was probably there for 10 minutes total, and the guy by the window never moved. He just stared out onto the street, his hands wrapped around his coffee cup. When I stepped outside with my box of treats, I noticed it had started to drizzle. I was parked about a block down, so I tightened my coat and started walking. That's when I noticed the guy from the window get up and leave the bakery too. He did not have a bag or anything, just his coffee, and he was walking in the same direction as me. I did not think much of it at first. It was a public sidewalk after all, and people walk. But as I kept going, I started feeling weird about how close he was behind me. He wasn't right on my heels, but close enough that I could hear his footsteps slapping the wet pavement. I am not a paranoid person, but something about this did not sit right with me. I picked up my pace a little, and so did he. I reached my car, fumbling with the box and my keys, and glanced back. He was maybe 15 feet away now, still walking towards me. But here's what made it worse. As soon as I turned around to look at him, he stopped. Just stopped, right there on the sidewalk. He did not even try to act casual, did not pretend to check his phone or look around. He just stood there, staring directly at me. I got the car door open and practically threw the box of pastries onto the passenger seat. I got in, locked the door, and started the engine. I tried to tell myself I was overreacting, that he was probably just some guy minding his own business. But when I looked up, he was still standing there, just staring. The second I pulled away, he started walking again, this time back towards the bakery. I watched him in my rearview mirror until I turned the corner, and then I couldn't see him anymore. The entire drive home, I felt sick, and I couldn't stop thinking about how he followed me, and how deliberate he seemed when he stopped and stared. I even started to wonder what would have happened if I dropped my keys, or taken longer to get to my car. I've told myself 100 times that he was probably harmless, just a guy having a weird morning. I've replayed the scene so many times, and every time I can't shake the feeling that he was waiting for something, or for me to do something. I have not been back to that bakery since, even though it is still there. I'm sure the place is fine, but I just can't bring myself to go inside. Every time I think about it, I picture him standing on that sidewalk, watching me, like he knew something that I didn't. A couple of years ago, my son and I had gone to a local bakery to pick up a cake for the football game that afternoon. We were hosting a small party, and I had pre-ordered a cake decorated with our team's logo. It was supposed to be a quick stop, in and out. I never thought I'd remember that day for anything other than the game. It was a small, family-owned bakery. You know the kind. Glass counters, the smell of fresh bread, shelves lined with cookies and pastries. When we walked in, there were only two other customers, a woman in her 40s picking out cupcakes, and an older man standing quietly at the far end of the counter. The older man caught my eye, though not for any particular reason at first. He was wearing a stained gray coat, hands tucked deep into his pockets, just standing there, staring straight ahead. Something about his posture struck me as odd, but I did not think much of it at the time. The woman finished up her order and left. My son and I approached the counter, and a teenage girl, probably 16 or 17, came out from the back to help us out. I gave her my name for the order, and she disappeared through a door to retrieve the cake. That's when I noticed the older man again. He hadn't moved an inch, hadn't ordered anything. He was still staring straight ahead, only now his hands were shaking slightly in his coat pockets. My son, who was 10 at the time, nudged me and whispered, "Dad, that guy's weird." I hushed him, but I agreed. Something about him did not feel right. The girl came back with the cake and set it on the counter. She was smiling, totally unaware of how tense the room suddenly felt. I reached into my wallet to pay, but before I could hand her my card, the older man spoke for the first time. "I need everything in the register." His voice was low and rough, but clear. I looked up, and he had pulled out a knife. Not a huge one, but sharp enough. My heart jumped. The girl froze, her eyes going wide. She did not move, and for a moment, none of us did. "Now," the man said, his voice cracking. "All of it." I put a hand on my son's shoulder and pulled him closer to me, trying to stay calm. The girl's hands were shaking as she opened the register and started pulling at the cash. She glanced at me, panicked. I did not know what to do. My phone was in my pocket, but I was not about to reach for it with him watching us. The man's hand holding the knife trembled, whether from nerves or something else, I don't know, but it scared me even more that he looked so unsure, like he might snap at any second. My son whispered, "Dad." I squeezed his shoulder and whispered back, "It's okay, just stay still." The girl handed over the cash, a small wad of bills. "That's all of it," she said. The man stared at her for a second that felt way too long. Then he looked at me. Our eyes met for just a second, and I'll never forget the look on his face. He looked desperate, empty, like he did not want to be there either. Finally, he backed towards the door, knife still in his hand. He muttered something under his breath. I couldn't make it out, and then he bolted, disappearing out the front door. The room was dead silent for a moment. Then the girl started crying. I grabbed my phone and called 911 while holding my son close. The cops showed up within minutes, but the guy was long gone. They took our statements, asked us to describe him. The bakery owners came in shortly after, apologizing even though it was not their fault. The scariest part, for me, was how quickly it all happened. One minute we were buying a cake for a football game, and the next we were caught in a robbery. My son still brings it up sometimes. "Remember the bakery, Dad?" he'll say. I try to laugh it off, tell him it's just one of those crazy stories we'll always remember. But the truth is, I don't think I'll ever forget the way that man looked at me. For a split second, I saw something in his eyes that terrified me more than the knife. And I saw a man who had nothing left to lose. I worked at a little bakery called Crumbly Delights last year, right before Christmas. It was not a bad job. The owners were nice, and the regulars were friendly. But sometimes, when I had to close up alone, the place felt creepy. I couldn't explain why. It was just an old building with creaky floors and bad lighting. This happened a couple of nights before Christmas. I was the last one there because we'd been slammed all day. People were picking up holiday orders, and by the time we finally slowed down, it was already dark. I was exhausted. My coworker had left an hour earlier, so it was just me locking up. A dad and his kid came in right as I was about to flip the sign to closed. They were picking up a cake for a holiday party they were hosting that night. The dad was chatty, joking about how his wife would kill him if he forgot it. The son, maybe 10 or 11, just stood there scrolling on his phone. I handed over the cake. They said thanks, and I locked the doors behind them. It was finally quiet. I finished wiping down the counters and started counting the cash in the register. That's when I heard it. A sound coming from the basement. It wasn't loud, just a soft thump, like something heavy shifting. The basement at Crumbly Delights is where we kept the old baking equipment and supplies. It was unfinished, with concrete floors and bare bulbs that barely lit the space. I'd only been down there once, and it creeped me out. Still, I told myself it was probably just the pipes, or maybe something fell. Old buildings make noises all the time. I ignored it and kept counting. Then I heard it again. This time it sounded closer, like something moving up the basement stairs. My pulse started racing, but I tried to stay logical. Maybe a mouse or a raccoon got in. The owners were always complaining about how hard it was to keep pests out of the basement. I did not want to investigate, but I also did not want to leave something alive in there overnight. I grabbed the flashlight we kept under the counter, took a deep breath, and opened the basement door. The stairs creaked loudly as I walked down, flashlight beam bouncing off the concrete walls. "Hello," I called, feeling ridiculous as soon as I said it. My voice echoed in the empty space. I swept the light around, but did not see anything unusual. A few shelves of old equipment, some boxes, and a broken mixer in the corner. Then I saw it, a footprint in the dust on the basement floor. It was fresh. I froze, the beam of my flashlight shaking in my hands. The footprint was big, like a man's boot. I had not been down there in weeks, and no one else was supposed to be either. I turned to go back up the stairs when I heard a quick, sharp creak from behind me, the sound of weight shifting on wood. I swung the flashlight around, and for a split second, I thought I saw someone, just the faint outline of a man standing at the far edge of the basement. My brain could not process it. I blinked, and when I looked again, he was gone. Or maybe he had never been there. I bolted up the stairs, slammed the door shut, and locked it. My hands were shaking so hard I fumbled the keys twice. I did not stop to grab my coat or the rest of my things. I just ran out the front door and into my car. I sat there for a minute, heart pounding, trying to tell myself I imagined it. But when I looked back at the bakery, I could see the basement door through the window. It was open. The next day, I told my boss. He looked concerned, but said no one should have been down there. We checked the basement together, but there was nothing there. No footprints, no signs of a break-in. I did not imagine that footprint, though. And I did not imagine the man. I never worked another closing shift alone after that. Hey, what's up, guys? It's Spooky. If you've made it this far, congratulations. You survived. If you did not know, I have an Instagram. Follow me on there so we can connect. And I also have a Patreon. On there, you'll have direct access to me and can see the upcoming videos, polls, and soon-to-be exclusive stories only shared on there. If that's something that interests you, please consider joining. That's all I have for you guys tonight. Stay spooky, and I'll see you in the next video.